Hi everybody, just doing this quick video on how I prepare my palette for oil painting. Color is something that I've kind of struggled with for a long time, and I still struggle with it. I think it's one of the hardest subjects to master because color is kind of subjective. Like different painters will use different palettes and they'll use different colors in their works and so on and so forth. So it's a subject that I've definitely struggled with, but I found what helps me the most is actually preparing my palette before I jump into a painting. And so this is the palette that I've got laid out before me. And so the very first thing that I will do actually is, you can see this grayish tone that I've covered the palette with. This palette was actually white. It was just a cheap palette that I just kind of picked up from the store, and it was white. And I didn't like that because I don't really like mixing my colors on white. It's a bit hard to judge whether you've got the right values or the right colors. So what I did was I took a bit of the burnt sienna that I've got, a bit of ultramarine blue just to kind of gray it down, and then mix that in with the white. That gives me like a nice neutral gray. And I smear that all over the palette. So, I kind of just put like random spots of paint. I get a little bit of solvent. I get like maybe like a paper towel or even like a makeup sponge would be good. And I just smear it all over the palette until I get this neutral gray color. And I do this every single time that I clean my palette. So I don't really clean my palette. If I've got a bunch of paint over here from a session of painting, I'll actually just mix the colors together, get a bit of solvent in there just to kind of dilute it a little bit. And again, just using a makeup sponge or a rag or whatever you've got, just smear the colors into each other until they turn into this neutral gray tone. And this just gives me a really nice base with which to work with. And you can kind of build up the layers over time. Your palette, this is a fresh palette, but over time, your palette will actually end up like this really nice gray sheen. And it's quite beautiful to work off of. So that's the very first thing that I do. Okay, so the next thing that I do, once the palette's prepared, I've got the value that I want and I've got that neutral tone, then I'll start laying out my colors. You can use any colors you want, to be honest. I'm always changing my colors. Like for example, this is a Pyrrole red, but sometimes I might use cadmium red. Sometimes I might use like any kind of red, to be honest. I'm not really loyal to any particular palette. Sometimes I've used the Zorn palette before. So the colors that I'm using aren't really important. I think what is important is how I'm laying it out. And you can see I'm kind of going around the color wheel. So I've got my neutrals on this side. This is my burnt sienna, and that's my titanium white. I put those off to the side. And then here I've kind of got the color wheel laid out. So obviously it's like blue, purple, red, orange, yellow, and then back to teal, which kind of comes back into the blue. So you can see how it kind of goes around in a circle, okay? If you're interested in what colors I'm using on this palette, then I will tell you. But like I said, it's not really important. I think what is important is how you lay them out. But what I've got here is ultramarine blue, very popular color. I've got quinacridone magenta over here, which is giving me this nice, cool, sort of purplish red. I really like that. That's a really nice red. I've got Pyrrole red, but sometimes I might use cadmium. I've got yellow ochre deep over here, and it's not very pale. It's a very deep, strong yellow ochre. It's quite orange. It's very warm, but I like it. It's a nice color to use, and that's a Michael Harding brand. So I like Michael Harding colors because they're very vibrant. So that's the yellow ochre deep. I've got Arylide yellow over here, which is quite strong actually. You could use maybe like a cadmium yellow or a lemon yellow. I have used lemon yellow quite a lot, and that's a nice one. But this is like a nice vibrant yellow. It's quite strong. It tends to overpower, I think. So just be careful with that one. And then finally on this side, I've got cobalt teal, which again comes back into the blue. So it's going around in a circle. It's like a color wheel, basically. That's how I've laid it out. And my neutrals are over here. So then the next thing that I like to do is I like to mix like a bit of a value scale, as you can see. So I've got like dark values at the top and I've got the white at the bottom. So I'll take a bit of titanium white, for example, put it at the bottom, mix the cobalt teal into the white until it gradually becomes lighter, as you can see. And I do that with every single color. Then I will mix a dark color, like a black. I mix my black using burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. And it doesn't give me like a pure black, but that's how I like it. I like to kind of tweak the black. If I want the black to be a bit warmer, I will use burnt sienna, put a bit more of that in. If I want the black to be cooler, then I can use a bit more ultramarine blue. So I like to customize the black a little bit. But on this palette, I've done my best to kind of mix it sort of like a neutral temperature, not too warm, not too cool. And I've got this dark value along the top of the palette. And then I mix each color into that value. And then finally, what I do is I take the teal and the yellow, for example, and I mix those together to create this green. Then I do the same with the yellow ochre deep and the yellow to create this sort of orangey yellow color, and so on and so forth. And then I take my dark value and I mix in between into the green. Same with the white. You have to be kind of careful. You have to be quite precise when you're doing it this way because it can get messy. So, you know, with your palette knife, you're just making little tiny adjustments, just slowly mixing. It's a little bit time consuming to prepare a palette like this, but I think it's worth it. I think it's worth going through the effort. And to be honest, you only have to do this once, okay? I never clean this. I always keep this the same. If this is the palette that I want to use for the duration of the painting, then this is how I'm going to keep it. So I never really clean this. Yeah, I just keep it as it is. And then if I run out of paint, obviously, you know, if I run out of yellow, for example, I'll just take the tube, put a bit of yellow in that space. Same again here. Yeah, so I kind of keep this palette as is. I intend to work with these colors for quite a while. So that's how I'm going to keep it. And yeah, so I don't really have to clean that. So you only really have to mix it once. It's a one and done job. And the reason I do this, okay, so the reason I do this is, like I said before, I do struggle with color sometimes. I think it really is the hardest subject to master because color is so subjective, I think. Different artists are always using different palettes and different colors in their work. And sometimes when you're in the process of mixing, it's kind of difficult to decide what color you want. So what I've done here is I basically created like a miniature color chart. That's kind of what I'm doing. I can see the values, I can see the different levels of brightnesses, I can see what happens when I mix the colors into each other. You know, if I need like a reddish orange color, that's a bit on the darker side, well then I can look straight to this and go, oh, okay, maybe I take a bit of that, and these two burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, mix some of those into it to darken it, boom, there you go. If I need like a bright greenish yellow, then, you know, I can look at my my yellow and my teal. I can see, oh, this is the green here, and then I can decide what value I need. If it needs to be bright, I can just mix a bit more white into it, so on and so forth. So it just, for me, going through this process, even though it's a bit time consuming, I only have to do it once, and it helps me a lot. It really helps me a lot because I'm not as lost when it comes to mixing color. I can just look at this chart that I've done and I go, oh yeah, I want like a sort of purple red. Boom, that's how I do it. I'll mix in a complementary color just to gray it down. So yeah, I think it's well worth the effort. This is how I do it. And maybe you could try it out for yourselves. Anyway, that's all I wanted to show you today. Hopefully that made sense, and I will upload the next video soon.